Pete Buttigieg is desperate for black people. Pretty much any black person would do. He's been photogenic with blacks, meaning trying to find any black person that he can essentially take a picture with. He was walking the line uneasily, weirdly, at a UAW strike. Again, filmed talking to a black person. This is probably the most black people outside of firing the black police chief in South Bend or ignoring the murder of an African American in that particular county that he's had the pleasure of engaging. Here's the thing. Buttigieg has a press conference. Now, what Buttigieg realizes is that Buttigieg, I think I keep pronouncing his name wrong, let's just call him Pete. What Pete realizes is that he has no chance of getting through the primary without having black support. Meaning, if he's continuing to poll at 0 to 2% with black support, his chances are for the most part nil. Sanders had a higher percentage in the last election and lost, and that was with less people being in the race. So, in order to deal with this very specific issue, Operation Get Black Folks to pretend to support me, to entice other black folks to support me. This didn't go well. Pete Buttigieg was throwing a press conference in South Bend to show his support among the African American community in that area. And Black Lives Matter protested. Buttigieg's campaign blames Sanders. Black Lives Matter protests. They put out a press announcement saying, yes, we did this and we support this action. And the campaign blames Sanders. I wasn't even going to do this story. This story was queued up. And there's so many other stories that happened yesterday that I really want to jump into. But it progressed. And now they're blaming Sanders. And Sanders' reaction to this is miserable. He makes the wrong choice once again. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal. Patron, this content is brought to you by you because it will be immediately demonetized. Buttigieg is heckled and trolled and protested by Black Lives Matter. Now, he brings in a community center of all of these random black folks. Now, this doesn't go well. The protester gets assaulted by one of the older people in there, meaning the woman takes out her cane and tries to hit one of the guy who's speaking. And the Buttigieg campaign, realizing that this is horrendous, I'm trying to show that I have black support and Black Lives Matter is protesting me, and my black supporters attack the Black Lives Matter protesters. This doesn't look well on its face because it shows once again that we have trouble with the black community. So let's just blame Sanders. Let's just blame Sanders. Politically, that looks better, and maybe we can change the topic from what actually took place to this other thing that did not. Let's watch from this angle for the moment. What you hear her talking about, meaning the tapes, have to do with the black police chief that Buttigieg fired. Now, supposedly, he had tapes of essentially cops being racist and plotting, and Buttigieg fired the guy. It was the first black police chief. Now, the catch becomes what was being said on the tapes. And she's saying, look, it's in litigation. Pete has never heard of the tapes or hasn't heard anything on the tapes. And these guys are fighting to try to get these things brought out in court. But we have no power to release the tapes. That's what she's arguing. Nobody believes that. because Pete fired them. That's why Pete fired them. And then you had cops conspiring to use Pete's donors in order to get rid of people on the force. Now, this is what went viral, though. So you heard Black Lives Matter protester going after this Blacks for Pete stuff. This is the angle that most people saw, though. Right here. That takes balls. God, that takes balls. That takes balls. Why are we talking about Pete Buttigieg? I don't know that guy. I agree with that guy. Why are we talking about Pete Buttigieg? Pete Buttigieg destroyed this homeless encampment around this time, or around Christmas. Meaning, these guys were already out in the cold, and it wasn't like Buttigieg was going to provide housing for them. We just need you guys to leave. That's the video that most people saw. And when people saw that video, it looks like a Hispanic guy. Well, I thought he was Hispanic and I thought he was gay. Going after, screaming about Pete Buttigieg. And people said, that guy's a Bernie supporter and it's Bernie Sanders' fault. Bernie Sanders came out and went after his... And by the way, just so we're clear, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter South Bend fully supports the actions of our members and allies as the Pete Buttigieg for America press conference held in South Bend, Indiana yesterday. This protest represents only a fraction of long-standing pain many black, brown, and poor citizens endure in Mayor Pete South Bend, Mr. Buttigieg's pattern of mismanagement and disregard for issues that affect many black citizens include zero accountability for the police department and its chief, zero implicit bias testing for officers, zero effort towards a democratically elected civilian review board with subpoena power, zero urgency in addressing the housing, the homeless, and zero effort in releasing the tapes. We have called for these necessary changes, but Mr. Buttigieg has not answered sufficiently. My only point is to nail down, this was a Black Lives Matter protest. Black Lives Matter South Bend approves of this protest. This had nothing to do with Sanders. And even this picture, right here. Pete kills homeless people. Again, this is the encampment that Buttigieg had essentially eviscerated during Christmas. They were already out in the cold and their situation got that much worse. The Sanders camp. What do you think Sanders does? What do you think Sanders does? Based on prior behavior, what do you think Bernie Sanders does? Think back for the moment to Nevada. Sanders supporters are cheated, meaning Sanders himself is cheated out of the delegates from Nevada. He had people were excluded from going in. Supposedly, Sanders should have gotten more people because he had ultimately more delegates. Hillary Clinton supporters, or her delegates, were too lazy to essentially get up. Nevada is weird in the way that they do their delegates, but you have to be in various places in order to count to be a delegate, all this other stuff. Long story short, Sanders should have ended up with more delegates. They did a hand call vote and brazenly stole that state. His supporters flipped out because they realized that they stole the state. Now, instead of this being the story and instead of this being the headline, Deborah Wasserman-Schultz comes out and says people were throwing chairs and that some Sanders supporters was throwing a chair. When I went into work the very next day, the boss came and says, "You guys really need to get these people under control." I was like, "What the hell are you talking about? You guys stole the state." And not just stole the state, nobody threw any chairs. Sanders comes out and criticizes something that never took place. Right here. The Sanders campaign does not support the disruption of any candidate's event, and we condemn anyone who does so. This country needs a serious and respectful debate over major crises that we face. Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Wouldn't an appropriate response could have also been, we had nothing to do with the disruption there, but there are serious issues in South Bend, Indiana that needs to be discussed, and Buttigieg has a record there that is up for debate and discussion, and we understand the angst and the anger that a community may face towards this issue. However you want to put it, you shouldn't ding people that may support you. They're not supporting Biden. They may support you. And the last thing you should do is acknowledge, or even pretend to acknowledge, the reality and the false narrative that lying Pete Buttigieg is framing. I find this to be a misstep, and I don't understand why there aren't people there in the Sanders camp that would say, these are our supporters, we should back our supporters. And in backing our supporters, not necessarily backing disruption of events, but you didn't have anything to do with that disruption of that particular event. And I've said it myself. I'm not big on stopping politicians from giving their speeches. But Pete Buttigieg wasn't stopped from giving a speech. And this was an independent group that decided to go and protest what they knew was essentially a bunch of people shucking and jiving for Pete Buttigieg, blacks for Pete, that they were being used as props. And they wanted to give the reality of events in South Bend from their perspective. The Sanders camp had nothing to do with that. And you should not pretend as if what he's saying there is accurate. Somebody in your camp should be able to say Buttigieg is trying to change the narrative of events, and you shouldn't allow them to do that. You allow them to the very least have a patina of legitimacy in their claim when you come out and put a statement like this. Back your supporters. Back your supporters. This is a fail response. Whatever you think of Black Lives Matter's disruption of that particular event, Pete Buttigieg was essentially having a bunch of black people as props. And you have a group that saw that, was aghast by that, and responded to that. I'm not big on disruptions of political events. By the same token, I had nothing to do with it. Sanders' camp had nothing to do with it. This was an individual protest. Protests are American as apple pie. Many events have been getting protested. That includes Joe Biden, I don't know, but Sanders was also disrupted by Black Lives Matter in 2016. And I would not be shocked if he gets disrupted again. I guess I'm just making a very basic point. Don't accept their framing of the world when their framing of the world is entirely politicized and a false narrative. You did it once in 2016, you did it again just now. Not saying that you were responsible, but this is a sucky reply. That's all. That's a sucky reply. But that said, that's basically what took place. That is basically this is basically what they're trying to frame it as. This is all politics. And this is not going to help Pete Buttigieg thing with black people. I don't know how Pete Buttigieg changes that with black people. I mean, ultimately Sanders is getting the younger blacks. Biden is getting the older blacks. That's the distribution. I don't know where Pete Buttigieg fits into this particular mix. I would say this to Sanders, though. Don't take your base for granted. And I mean that in the context of African Americans. That group is not supporting Biden. Clearly, they're not supporting Buttigieg. And I strongly suspect they're not supporting Warren. And if they're supporting anybody in this political campaign, it will most likely be you. That's a sucky response for people who are supporting you. And by the way, doing you a favor. Them disrupting Buttigieg's event like that exposes the nonsense with this. Pete Buttigieg finds random black people, throws them together in order to kind of give some kind of note to black people. other black people go and protest that event because they know it's bullshit and these people are being used as props, willingly or otherwise. That's doing you a favor. That's showing the con for what it is. And any response that you give should be to frame that back on, this is just the con. There are many issues in South Bend, Indiana, and black folks don't love Pete there, just like they don't love him elsewhere. Failed response by Sanders. But Black Lives Matter protests an event. Sanders gets blamed for it. Sanders, in an odd way, to some degree, I would say, tepidly accepts the framing of the narrative as opposed to framing the narrative back on what it actually was. That Buttigieg is essentially using these people as props. And that real people who aren't props didn't particularly like it. Like, share, subscribe. Be right back, guys.